Alright, so we're going to keep moving on here. We're going to be on page 72, lesson B. Alright, and we're going to be talking about adverb clauses. More specifically, clauses with when. So our adverb is going to be the word when. Remember, when, we use the word when we're talking about time. Okay, when we're talking about doing things in a period of time. Alright, and let's look here and refresh our memory about clauses. Alright, so a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. Alright, so they sound similar, very, very similar to sentences, full sentences, but they're not. Alright, they do have certain parts of speech like a subject and a verb, right? So nouns and verbs, but they're not complete sentences, all right? They are clauses. The word when often joins two clauses in which the activities occur at the same time, all right? Use when plus the present tense verbs to talk about habits. Alright, so we're going to be using when plus the present tense, right, or the base verb, right, the present tense verbs to talk about habits. Here's our example. When I have a lot to do, comma, I make a to-do list. Alright, when I have a lot to do, comma, I make, that's your verb, a to-do list. When she feels tired, comma, she takes a break. Right? When she feels tired, comma, she takes a break. Now notice here, when we have the word when at the beginning of our sentence, right? Well, actually, we could say when we have the word when at the beginning of our clause, because these are two clauses. All right, this sentence is made up of two clauses. All right, when I have a lot to do is one clause. I make a to-do list is another clause. All right, so when we have the word when at the beginning of our clauses, all right, we have to, and we join the two clauses, we have to use a comma. All right, so when I have a lot to do, comma, that's one clause. Here's the next clause. I make a to-do list. All right, let's look down here. I make a to-do list when I have a lot to do. Here again, we have two clauses, but we don't have to put the comma in there. All right, when I have a lot to do, I make a to-do list when I have a lot to do. Let's look at this, the last one. She takes a break when she feels tired. All right, she takes a break when she feels tired. So now these two are complete sentences. These two are two clauses put together. All right. Okay, so let's look at some useful language here in our blue box. Use a comma when the when clause is at the beginning of the sentence. All right. When you are speaking or reading out loud, pause after the comma. So we did that. So let's do that one more time so we can practice this. When I have a lot to do, I make a to-do list. When she feels tired, she takes a break. Here's a sentence without the comma because the when is in the middle. I make a to-do list when I have a lot to do. She takes a break when she feels tired. So there's no pause in there. All right? Okay. Let's move on. Let's practice. So we looked at adverb clauses using the adverb when, right? We went over again what clauses were, right? Now, let's practice. Combine the sentences. Use when, circle the adverb clause. All right, so we're going to use when, and then we're going to circle the adverb clause. So remember, the adverb clause, right? Clause is has a subject and a verb. All right. So here's our example. You have many things to do. Make a to-do list. Right. When you have many things to do, so they circled this. So this is the adverb clause. All right. Comma. Make a to-do list. All right. Let's look at the next one. You have a deadline. Write it on your calendar. So I would say here, when you have a deadline, comma, write it on your calendar, period. Number 3, don't let people interrupt you. You need to concentrate. So I would write this, when you you need to concentrate, comma, don't let people interrupt you. All right. You want to focus on your task. Turn off the television. All right. So I would write this, when you want to focus on your task, comma, turn off the television. Number 5, you feel tired. Take a break. I would write this, when you feel tired, comma, take a break. Number 6, give yourself a reward. You finished something difficult. I would write this, when you finish something difficult, comma, give yourself a reward. Number 7, don't procrastinate. You have a deadline. I would write this, when you have a deadline, comma, don't procrastinate. You are tired. Don't do difficult tasks. I would write this, when you are tired, comma, don't do difficult tasks. Number 9, prioritize tasks. You have many things to do. I would write this, when you have many things to do, prioritize tasks. All right. You can always scan this barcode here for track 4 of CD2 to listen to these sentences again, so that you can combine the sentences, use when, and circle the adverb clause. So let's see what the answers were. Okay. So let's take some time to look at these and see if I was right. Let's see if you were right. All right. So let's move on. Now we get to practice a little bit more. Talk with a partner, right? So this is maybe something that we can do on our live chats. We can talk to one another as a group, right? And then we can make sentences with when. Here's our example to the pictures that we see here. We have 2 people, Mr. Jackson and Mrs. Clark, or Miss Clark, sorry, Miss Clark. All right. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he doesn't answer the phone. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, comma, he doesn't or does not answer the phone. Miss Clark answers every call when she has a deadline. Miss Clark answers every call when she has a deadline. These are some of the words that we can use in our word bank when we start doing our filling in our sentences and having these conversations. Okay? The first word is expect. Expect. The next word is hope. Hope. The next word is intend. Intend. The next word is need. Need. The next word is plan. Plan. And the last word is want. Want. Okay? Mr. Jackson doesn't answer the phone. Mr. Jackson closes his office door. Mr. Jackson works on one task at a time. Mr. Jackson begins work immediately. Mr. Jackson does difficult tasks first. Mr. Jackson doesn't check email. Mr. Jackson makes no personal phone calls. So when we're talking about Mr. Jackson, we can say, when Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he doesn't answer the phone. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he closes his door, his office door. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he works on one task at a time. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he begins work immediately. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he does difficult tasks first. When Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he doesn't check email. And the last one, when Mr. Jackson has a deadline, he makes no personal phone calls. Now we can practice that using Miss Clark. Miss Clark answers every call when she has a deadline. Miss Clark allows people to interrupt her when she has a deadline. Or you can say, Miss Clark allows people to interrupt when she has a deadline. Miss Clark works on several things at once when she has a deadline. Miss Clark procrastinates. Let me say that again. Miss Clark procrastinates when she has a deadline. Miss Clark saves difficult tasks for last when she has a deadline. Miss Clark checks email frequently when she has a deadline. And the last one, Miss Clark makes many personal phone calls when she has a deadline. This is something that we can work on going into our Zoom chats, right? Communicate in small groups like what we do. Interview your classmates, complete the chart. So these are some of the things that we can ask each other. What do you do when you have a deadline? One answer could be, I usually procrastinate. Or another answer might be, I start working right away. So here are the questions that we can ask each other. What do you do when you have a deadline? Have many things to do. Finish a difficult task. Have trouble concentrating. And then this one could be anything that you want to ask, right? What do you do when you are hungry? Right? All right, in this video, we're going to go over lessons C and D in our Ventures Level 3 book. All right, and we're going to be talking about clauses with before and after. Okay, so before and after. We're going to use before and after in our clauses. So here's the questions. What do you do when you have homework? What do you do when you have homework? Second question is, what do you do when you have a headache? What do you do when you have a headache? So I put in my answers here. You can put in yours, but based on what we've learned previously in this chapter, I can answer this with the when. With when, okay? So the question is, what do you do when you have a headache? What do you do when you have homework? When I have homework, comma, I try to work in a quiet place. What do you do when you have a headache? When I have a headache, I take some Advil. All right? So let's do a recap. Before we jump into clauses with before and after, let's remember, let's think about independent and dependent clauses, right? So here are the definitions. An independent clause is a group of words that can stand on its own as a sentence. It has a subject, a verb, and is a complete thought. All right? So the big things to remember about an independent clause is that it can stand on its own, right? It has a subject, a verb, and is a complete thought. All right? So usually when we have an independent clause, it's a clause, right, that when I say something, you don't have to ask a question about it, right? Let's look at a dependent clause. A dependent clause is a group of words that also contains a subject and a verb, but is not a complete thought. Because it is not a complete thought, a dependent clause cannot stand on its own as a sentence. It is dependent on being attached to an independent clause to form a sentence. All right? So the big thing to remember about the dependent clause is that it cannot stand on its own. Okay, so let's and if you've noticed here, I have underlined independent clause and I circled dependent clause, right? So let's go back to my two questions. What do you do when you have homework? When I have homework, now I've circled this, so this is this is a dependent clause, right? When I have homework. If I just left it just like this, when I have homework, you'd ask the question, what? When I have homework, what? Keep going, right? So, comma, I try to work in a quiet place. So if I said, I try to work in a quiet place, that's a complete thought, all right? And I've underlined that. So that is our independent clause, all right? So I try to work in a quiet place when I have homework. All right, that's another way of writing that. Let's look at the second one. What do you do when you have a headache? When I have a headache, okay, so that's circled, that's our dependent clause. I take medicine, that is underlined, that is our independent clause. If I just say I take medicine, that's a complete thought. All right. If I say when I have a headache, you'd ask me, when you have a headache, what? Keep going. What's the rest of your sentence, right? All right. So what happens here is that there is a sequence. All right. One clause sets up the sequence for the next. All right. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to take a closer look at this sequence. All right, and we will get a little bit more deep into clauses with before and after.